There are men who don't leave you with words of goodbye, but with cold calculations like businessmen cutting off an unprofitable investment. I was once that investment, the perfect supporting wife. The companion who never demanded, never disturbed, always smiled at the right moment, always stood in the right place. But on our 5th wedding anniversary, in front of 300 guests inside the lavish hall I had helped create, he handed me a gift divorce papers. He thought he was the director. He thought I would collapse. But he forgot one thing. I too know how to rewrite the ending. And today I will tell you how I brought down a powerful man with the one thing he never saw coming, the truth. Chapter 1. The Performance of a Betrayer. I never imagined that my 5th wedding anniversary would end like a public tragicomedy, with me as the humiliated character on stage. He had prepared everything as if he were staging an award ceremony. A lavish banquet hall overflowing fresh flowers, expensive champagne, shimmering lights draping the room. 300 guests, both families, close friends, major business partners of my husband Jake. Everyone was there. I wore the midnight blue dress he once said made my eyes unforgettable. Back then I thought it was a romantic compliment. Now I know it was calculation. Because he wanted me flawless, so that when I was destroyed, people would remember it forever. When the MC invited us onto the stage to share a special surprise, I was still smiling. I didn't know exactly what was about to happen, but my heart, it knew. A cold sensation crept from my chest down into my stomach. My intuition had never been wrong. And then he turned to me, his eyes triumphant, as if he had just won a filthy wager. He handed me a manila envelope. As the entire hall held its breath, I opened it. Divorce papers. No warning. No conversation. Just a piece of paper. Already printed, signed, and prepared to be tossed into my hands, in front of hundreds of eyes waiting to see what this anniversary gift would be. Surprised sweetheart Jake whispered into my ear, his breath scorching my neck like a slap without hands. I heard someone in the crowd gasp. A champagne glass shattered against the marble floor. Phone cameras sparkled like fireworks. I should have trembled. I should have cried. A normal wife would have crumbled right there. But I was no longer a normal wife. I had learned how to stay silent while being dismissed. I had pretended to be fine while being deceived. I had smiled at parties while he whispered to someone else behind my back. But tonight was not ordinary. I lifted my gaze to Jake, keeping my voice steady even though blood was roaring through my ears like waves crashing. I asked him softly, "How long have you been planning this?" He smiled, the smile of a snake dressed as a successful businessman. Everything he said, from the guest list to the bridal bouquet in your favorite color, even the dress you're wearing. Do you know why I chose midnight blue? Because I once said it made you unforgettable. And I wanted you flawless when I destroyed you. I remember so clearly the look in everyone's eyes that hadn't yet grasped what was happening, then slowly shifting into shock, then whispers, then phones raised to record. The entire room seemed to choke on silence. And Jake? He raised his chin with pride as if he had just completed a masterpiece of performance. Adjusting his bow tie, he declared, "People will talk about this for years." A breakup couldn't be more perfect. He thought this was the end. He thought I would stay silent, sign the papers, and vanish like the obedient wife he always imagined me to be. But Jake had forgotten one important thing. He wasn't the only one who knew how to plan. Chapter 2. Planting the Seed of Doubt. There's something peculiar about betrayal. It never begins with an explosion. It begins with faint little clicks, like drops of water falling into a glass. One drop, then another, until the glass overflows. For me, the first drop fell on a March afternoon. Jake had just come back from his checkup as cheerful as a kid who'd gotten a perfect score. "Clean bill of health," he shouted, waving the stack of test results in front of me before tossing them onto the kitchen counter and heading into the shower. I was tasting pasta sauce, barely paying attention, but when I wiped my hands and casually glanced at those results, one tiny line made me freeze. Blood type O negative. I frowned. A flash of memory struck Jennifer Jake's mother once told me she was A positive, and her husband Robert was too. Both parents were A positive. So how on earth could Jake be O negative? I wasn't a doctor, but I had learned enough high school biology to know genetically that was impossible. I almost asked Jake then and there, but I hesitated. He walked out of the bathroom with damp hair wrapped in a white towel, eyes gleaming. I didn't want to ruin his mood, so I stayed silent. But later that night, while he slept, I got out of bed, opened our wedding album, and turned to a photo I had never truly scrutinized. Jake standing between his parents on our wedding day, all three of them smiling brightly. I looked closely at their eyes. Robert's were light brown with a hint of hazel. Jennifer's a deep, almost black brown. And Jake. From the first moment I met him, I was drawn to those bright green eyes, a green that could never be mistaken. It was then I began to feel something was off. I turned to Google. I dug through old textbooks. I even called a friend who worked in medicine to confirm. And everything pointed to the same conclusion. The chance of two dominant gene parents like Jennifer and Robert producing a child with green eyes was extremely rare, nearly impossible. Combined with the inconsistency in blood type, the puzzle pieces Jake had painted for me began to loosen. I started to re-examine every detail. The times Jake dodged my questions about his childhood. The times Jennifer quickly changed the subject whenever someone mentioned Uncle David, a name I had only heard in passing, always followed by a strange silence. The photos that lacked the presence of young parents when Jake was little. And then, something happened that I could no longer dismiss. I was cleaning out an old desk drawer in the study Robert's former desk, now crammed with unorganized papers. As I lifted an old tax folder, a worn manila envelope slipped out. Inside was a stack of Jake's childhood photos, and buried among them was one faded picture. Jake at about 8 years old standing next to a tall man with dark hair and the exact same green eyes. On the back of the photo, in handwriting, Jake and Uncle David, Christmas 1995. I just sat there for minutes, unable to breathe. It felt like I was staring at the first crack in a mirror I had once believed to be flawless. Jake had never mentioned anyone named David, and Jennifer had always avoided the subject, and so the drops of doubt finally overflowed the glass. I needed the truth. Not out of jealousy, not out of anger, but for one reason alone, I had to know who I was truly living with. Chapter 3, The Secret Investigation. I once thought that if the day ever came when I investigated my husband, it would be because he was cheating. But no. I wasn't looking for proof that he was sneaking around with another woman. I was searching for proof that the man I had lived with for 5 years might not even be who he believed himself to be. After the night I discovered the photo of Jake and Uncle David, I could no longer sleep soundly. Not because of anger, but because I was haunted by one simple question. If Jake wasn't Robert Mitchell's biological son, then his entire life, his name, his wealth, his prestige was built on a lie. And if that were true, then why had he chosen to humiliate me so publicly? 3 days later, I sat in a small cafe downtown facing Marcus Chin, a private investigator recommended by a lawyer friend of mine. He was 5 minutes late, and instead of apologizing, he simply sat down and opened his notebook. I need to know I said my voice steadier than I felt. Whether my husband, Jake Mitchell, is truly Robert Mitchell's biological son. Marcus looked up unsurprised. Is there a medical reason for this? He asked. Yes. His blood type doesn't match. And an old photo with a man his family has never spoken of. I didn't come to you to catch an affair. I want the truth. Complete. And absolutely confidential. Very well. Marcus nodded. I'll start with Jake's birth records. Then I'll trace the attending physician, the hospital, anyone connected. If there's irregularity, we'll dig deeper. I pulled a card from my wallet, the supplementary credit card Jake had given me last year for weekend shopping. I had never exceeded its limit. Now I used it to pay for the collapse of his own facade. 6 weeks later, Marcus returned with a thick file, dropping it onto my study desk, like thunder cracking across a clear sky. "Are you certain?" I asked, holding the DNA results in trembling hands. "Absolutely. 100%. This is a cross-match hair samples from Jake collected from the comb he uses at his gym. The comparison came from Jennifer, and from Robert Mitchell's DNA remains preserved in medical storage after his passing. The results are conclusive. Jake is not Robert's son. No genetic relation whatsoever." I swallowed hard. Marcus continued. "Here's the original birth certificate, the hospital's first record. Signed by Dr. Harrison. Blood type listed as O negative. But 1 week later, the birth certificate was amended and the hospital file altered. Blood type changed to A positive. Stated reason, clerical error." "Clerical error," I scoffed. Marcus shook his head. "Not at all. I found a transaction record, $50,000 wired from Jennifer's personal account to Dr. Harrison's exactly 2 days after Jake was born." My hands went cold. Harrison has since retired in Florida, but I secured a recorded statement from him enough to confirm that he accepted the money to falsify the blood results, alter the birth certificate, and forge hospital records. I sat in silence. The layers of the so-called perfect Mitchell family were peeling away one by one. "And the man in the photograph?" I asked. Marcus turned to the final page. "David Patterson, former business partner of Robert. Disappeared from the city when Jake was 5. He now lives in Sacramento under his mother's surname, new address, an entirely new identity." "He's still alive," I whispered. "Yes." "And he confirmed that he had a romantic relationship with Jennifer Mitchell during the winter of 1993. He said, 'I loved her. We once planned to leave everything behind, but then she got pregnant and she vanished from my life.'" When Marcus left, I sat alone for hours staring at the copy of the DNA results. Jake Mitchell, the man who always held his head high, boasting of his family bloodline, had never belonged to that lineage at all. Everything he possessed, his name, his wealth, his reputation, his status, was the product of a lie protected for 30 years. And now, that wall was about to crumble. I placed all the documents into a deep blue silk-wrapped box and locked it away in a drawer. At that moment, I knew one thing for certain. If Jake had planned to humiliate me in front of hundreds, then I would make sure the truth appeared before an audience just as large. Not for revenge, not just for the pain he caused me, but for justice. Chapter 4, The Double Betrayal. I had thought that discovering Jake wasn't truly a Mitchell by blood was the heaviest blow I would ever take. But it turned out some cuts don't come from knives. They come from sidelong glances, hastily deleted messages, sudden overtime hours, and strange looks from another woman. I had noticed Melissa Cartwright long before that anniversary night. She was the marketing director at Jake's company, nearly 10 years younger than me, with blazing red hair like fireworks, dressed never excessively, but always just enough to command attention when she entered a room. At first I told myself I was being paranoid, but once you've uncovered a secret as monumental as Jake isn't truly a Mitchell, the smaller secrets begin to glow under ultraviolet light like ink you can't unsee. One evening while Jake was showering, his phone lay open on the desk. I wasn't the type to snoop through messages, at least I used to think I wasn't, but instinct spoke louder than morality. I saw a string of messages from MC. The latest one read, "Don't worry, she doesn't suspect a thing. Tonight I'll wear the dress you love. She, not my name, not his wife, just she." And just as Melissa had written that evening, Jake went to a networking event. One I wasn't invited to, though in previous years I had always attended with him. I didn't ask. I didn't make a scene. I simply recorded it in memory. I remembered everything, the late nights, the business trips that overlapped with holidays. The way Melissa looked at him during company meetings when I was still the wife, helping build a family legacy instead of the abandoned spouse counting down her days. I thought biological betrayal was bad enough, but emotional betrayal? That was the second blade. I had once loved Jake, truly. I had stood by his side during the years he built his company, stayed with him through Robert's death, cared for Jennifer when she broke her leg, and sacrificed my own career to build our home with him. But in Jake's eyes, it seemed I had only ever been the backdrop to his portrait of ambition. And once that portrait was complete, he was ready to replace the frame, and Melissa was the new frame. It didn't matter how long they had been together. What mattered was that Jake thought I was too blind to notice. Worse still, he had already planned my erasure, as if I were a temporary file to be deleted cleanly after use. I found an email draft on his personal computer, unsent, written to his lawyer. I want this handled smoothly. A grand ceremony, so everyone thinks we're fine. I'll hand her the papers on stage. She won't have time to react. Everyone will be on my side. Most important, no damage to my personal reputation or the company. I reread that last line over and over like a poisonous mantra. No damage to my personal reputation. He wanted to destroy me, without so much as a scratch on his own image. A perfect performance in his mind. The irony was bitter. The man who fancied himself a brilliant director never realized he was merely building the stage for his own downfall. That was when I began to laugh quietly to myself. A silent laugh, not out of glee, but because I knew this game was no longer Jake versus Brooke. This was truth versus lies. Integrity versus manipulation. Jake had chosen our anniversary to end everything, so I would choose that very day to begin his end. Chapter 5. Brooke prepares her counterattack. I knew Jake, and the first rule in defeating a man like him is never to react immediately. Men like Jake don't fear anger. They don't fear tears. He was used to that. He had seen it on the faces of business rivals, employees. He cast aside women who once loved him only to be abandoned. Outbursts only fed his pride, confirming his power. But silence. Silence was something he could never comprehend. So I chose silence. I continued to play the gentle wife, attending parties by his side, dining on time, wishing him good night with a smile, even as he booked a second honeymoon, which, in truth, was another escape with Melissa. I smiled at my reflection in the mirror and thought, go on, Jake. Keep building your stage. I'll be the obedient supporting actress until the spotlight shines on the truth. I began spending more time with Jennifer, Jake's mother. After Robert passed away, she lived alone in that vast mansion, partly out of loneliness, partly clinging to her faith in the perfect son she had raised for 30 years. I cared for her sincerely, not as pretense, but with genuine compassion. Though she had been part of the lie, I knew she was also its victim. I brought her chamomile tea every Saturday, organized her medications, listened to her stories of youth, and slowly I watched her heart begin to soften. Once, while flipping through an old photo album, she whispered, "David." He always said Jake had his eyes. I used to worry people would notice. I didn't respond. I only held her hand. One night, Jennifer was hospitalized with a mild case of pneumonia. I was the one who packed her things. As I folded her clothes into the bag, an old letter slipped from the book she had been reading. Delicate handwriting faded with age, addressed to Robert. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I placed it into a box, the same deep blue silk-wrapped box, the one I would later carry to the anniversary party place, into Jennifer's hands and ask her to open before 300 witnesses. Meanwhile, I worked quietly with Sarah, my lawyer friend. Together we prepared a civil suit in case Jake dared to strike back. She helped me notarize every piece of evidence, the original medical files, Jennifer's money transfer records, Dr. Harrison's recorded confession, and Marcus's documents. We sealed the official files, but I kept a complete copy, the copy I would wield like a bomb at that party. Then, Jake made his move. "I'm planning something for our 5th anniversary," he said one evening, brimming with excitement. "I want it to be big, grand. To mark a milestone, before we move on to a new chapter. I nodded. I love surprises, and he never knew. I was preparing a surprise of my own. I let him choose the banquet hall, choose the guest list, even the band. I let him construct the entire play, gave him full control as director. And I waited only for the climax, to step out from behind the curtain and rewrite the ending. Chapter 6, The Shattered Celebration. I still remember the feel of the hardwood floor beneath my heels as I stepped onto that stage. The spotlight blazed blinding, but not as blinding as the truth I carried in my handbag. A silk-covered box, neat, quiet, but inside was the storm Jake would never see coming. He stood beside me, wearing the smile of a victor about to strike his final blow. I looked at him for 1 second and smiled back. "Surprise, sweetheart," he whispered in my ear, just as the crowd erupted into applause. I turned my head as the waiter stepped up with a microphone. Jake took it, tapped it lightly. "Thank you all for being here on our special day," he began, his voice deep, confident, the same tone he used at conferences, company galas, and press events. "We've had 5 wonderful years of marriage, and I think it's time to open a new chapter." And then, amid scattered applause, he handed me a manila envelope. "Brooke," he declared loudly, "I want you to know this is your liberation." I opened the envelope. Divorce papers. A ripple of whispers spread like an underground wave. Someone dropped a champagne glass. Another raised a phone recording, of course. Jake turned toward the audience like a performer finishing his grand finale. "This," he said, half joking, half serious, "is how you end a love story. With style. With an audience worthy of it." People will talk about this for years. I should have felt humiliated, but I didn't tremble. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I simply reached into my handbag and pulled out the deep blue silk box I had prepared weeks earlier. Stepping off the stage, I moved through the crowd as though approaching an honorees table. I stopped before a woman, Jennifer Mitchell, my mother-in-law, frozen in her seat as though her instincts already warned her that something was about to happen. I smiled softly, gently. "Jennifer," I said, placing the box into her hands. "Would you help me open this?" I saw her hands begin to shake. She looked at me, then at Jake. Jake stood on the stage, frowning. "Brooke, what are you doing?" I didn't answer. I only looked at Jennifer. "I think you'll recognize what's inside," I whispered. She swallowed hard. The entire room fell silent. Even the band stopped playing. Only the pounding of someone's heartbeat, maybe my own, filled the air. Jennifer untied the blue ribbon, slowly, each movement like diffusing a time bomb. Then she looked inside and froze. I saw the moment truth hit her like an avalanche. She saw the letter. The letter she had written but never sent. The letter I had found tucked in her book at the hospital. The letter addressed to Robert Mitchell. "No," she whispered so softly only I could hear. But Jake's microphone, still clipped to his lapel, caught every syllable. The word "no" echoed through the banquet hall. Everyone held their breath. Jake descended from the stage, his face flushed with shock and fury. "What's going on, Mom? What's in there?" Jennifer shook her head, hands trembling violently. Then she looked at me, as if waiting for permission. I nodded, gently, very gently. "Read it," I said, aloud, for everyone to hear. She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened the letter. "Dearest Robert," she began, her voice trembling like autumn wind. "You deserve to know the truth I've hidden for 30 years. The audience leaned in tense. No one dared to cough. Jake stood frozen, fists, clenched lips pressed white, but she continued. "In the winter of 1993, while you were constantly away on business, I felt lonely, and then David returned from Chicago." A sharp intake of breath cut through the crowd. "David Patterson." I didn't have to say a word. Jennifer spoke for me. "I had an affair, and then I became pregnant. I hoped it was Robert's child, But the doctor, David's cousin, did a blood test, and the results showed Jake was not Robert's biological son. The whispers surged into a storm. Jake staggered back a step as though struck in the chest. No, that's impossible. Jennifer broke into sobs. He knew. I paid money to change the records, to make it look like a system error. I thought I was protecting my son. But really, I was only protecting myself. The hall fell silent, then erupted. Glasses clinked. Phones pointed directly at the stage. All eyes turned to Jake, no longer the Mitchell heir, but an imposter child raised inside a family built on lies. And I stood quietly. No gloating, no mockery. I only whispered to myself, "You wanted an audience for my downfall. Now you have an audience for your own collapse." Chapter 7, Unmasking the Mitchell Dynasty. The silence after Jennifer finished reading the letter lasted exactly 3 seconds. 3 empty seconds. 3 seconds in which no one had yet processed what they had just heard. Then chaos began. But it wasn't shouting or rage. No. It was the buzz of whispers, spreading like electricity. Questions fired like bullets. He isn't the biological son. Then, what about the entire Mitchell estate? Did she just say $50,000 bought silence? Is this real? Has someone recorded it? I didn't need to say another word. I had given the spotlight to the right person at the right time. Jennifer had stripped the truth bare, and I simply stood back and watched a false castle crumble brick by brick. Jake stood in the center of the ballroom, face pale, bow tie askew eyes, searching for footing in the middle of an earthquake. I caught sight of Margaret Whitmore, the senator's wife, who had once hosted her daughter's wedding at the Mitchell estate, staring at Jake as though he were a stranger. Her champagne glass trembled, leaving a red lipstick mark on the rim. "I can't believe this," she whispered. "The Mitchells are the backbone of this community." "Perhaps they never were," came a cold reply from behind her. Jake moved toward Jennifer, his voice cracking with fury and desperation. "Mom, you lied. This doesn't prove anything." Jennifer looked at him, the son she had shielded for 3 decades, and shook her head. "Jake, the truth doesn't need your permission to exist." A man rose from the front row. Richard Blackstone, Jake's largest business partner. He removed his glasses, adjusted his collar, and turned to leave without a word. But before stepping out, he paused, turned back, and said loudly enough for all to hear Jake, "Call me Monday morning. We need to revisit our contract." I knew that contract was worth nearly $2 million a year. And now it was about to vanish. I looked toward the far end of the room. Melissa. She stood between 2 marble columns trying to fade into the dim light. But her fiery red hair betrayed her. She looked at me, then at Jake, then turned away. No anger, no tears, just emptiness. Her hand trembled as she pulled out her phone. Perhaps a message from a friend. Perhaps someone asking, "Are you at that party?" the live stream. Because yes, it was being live streamed. A student nearby whispered, 3,000 people on TikTok, and rising fast. Melissa glanced at Jake once more, her face drained of color. No more confidence, no more victorious glances like the ones I had seen in the elevator when they thought no one noticed. Now she looked like a lost child in a crowd, and then she left, not running. She walked slowly, head bowed, clutching her purse to her chest like a shield. But I saw, and more importantly, Jake saw. I saw his shoulders collapse as though every ounce of strength had drained from him. "Melissa," he called, voice breaking. She didn't turn. The doors closed behind her like a final period. That was when the silent exodus began. The Henderson family left first, then the Cruthers, then Jake's golf buddies, the same men who once raised glasses and called him the Mitchell heir. No one said a word. They only nodded at me, then walked straight out. Even Marcus Webb, Jake's college best friend and best man at our wedding, only looked at him from a distance, then shook his head and walked away. 30 years building an image, 30 minutes to see it collapse. And me, I didn't give a speech. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my fist like some movie heroine. I simply lifted a champagne glass, the very brand Jake had carefully imported from France, and took a small sip. It had gone flat. But the taste of victory was still rich. And this was only the beginning. Chapter 8. The Midnight Call. Confrontation after the ruins. I left the party in silence. No words to Jake, no turning back. I carried only my small handbag and left behind the murmurs of the crowd, the scrutinizing eyes of high society, and a man slowly realizing that everything he had ever believed to be true was nothing more than a lie. Outside the ballroom, beneath the crystal canopy of the hotel, I stood alone, breathing in the cool night air. No more spotlights. No more microphones. Only me, whole, unbroken, and free. My phone began to vibrate. Again and again. Jake. I let it ring a third time, then a fourth. On the fifth I answered, but said nothing. Brooke. His voice rasped, hurried, desperate. Where are you? We need to talk. Please, this can't be real. I remained silent. He swallowed hard, then pressed on. What my mother said. She's not well. Lately she forgets things. The doctor mentioned early signs of mild dementia brought on by stressed Jake. My voice cut in soft as wind rippling over a lake. He fell silent. I didn't pick up to hear excuses. I answered, to give you one last chance to hear the truth. Brooke, I know you're angry. I know the public divorce stunt was wrong, but we can fix this. It's not too late. We can try counseling. Where are you calling from? I interrupted. The parking lot. Still at the hotel. Everyone's gone. Even the staff avoid looking at me. Are you happy now? I poured myself a glass of Macallan 25, the bottle he had hidden away for special occasions. Then I said, good. What I asked because I wanted to be sure you're still there, alone, just as you plan to leave me alone in front of 300 people. He was quiet for a few seconds. Then his voice dropped lower, almost broken. Do you realize how much this will cost me? My reputation, my career, my assets. I could lose everything. Assets, I repeated. That wealth was never yours to begin with, Jake. You were never the rightful heir. You lived off a lie. All I did was remove the mask. He exhaled sharply. You knew all along, didn't you? I knew for months. About David Patterson, about Dr. Harrison, about the $50,000 to falsify the hospital records. I knew it all. And you said nothing. No, I stayed silent. I watched. I waited until you walked willingly into the play you had scripted, so I could add the ending it deserved. For the first time, his voice weakened, a faint whisper. Was that revenge, Brooke? Was the whole performance? Just to destroy me, I walked to the window, gazing out at the garden behind the house he once proudly called his greatest achievement. It wasn't revenge, Jake, I said evenly. It was justice. There's a difference. Revenge would mean I lied like you did. Justice means I told the truth, in front of everyone. He swallowed. I could hear the hum of his car's air conditioning through the phone. Is there nothing left for us? No. And in truth, there hasn't been for a long time. You just never noticed because you assumed I'd stay forever. But tonight you learned everything built on lies. Eventually falls. You don't understand. I just wanted to control the narrative. Avoid scandal. I let out a quiet laugh. You wanted to avoid scandal, but you chose the grandest stage, the largest audience, to discard me like an expired contract. He had no reply. I already filed for divorce this morning, I continued. Under the name Brooke Carter, the name you once mocked for being too ordinary. Brooke. And I think it's perfectly enough. When I ended the call, I knew this. He had phoned not to find me, but to be rescued from the ruin of his own image. But I was no longer the woman who spent her life patching the cracks in his facade. I had let go, not out of weakness, but because I no longer wished to cling to something that had never been real. Chapter 9. The Cabin in Stillness. I left the city 3 weeks after that night. No announcements, no farewells. I simply folded a few clothes into a suitcase, brought along a couple of books, my favorite tea set, and Jennifer's letter, not as a weapon anymore, but as a reminder that truth, no matter how long it takes, always finds its way to light. The cabin I rented sat by a lake about a 3-hour drive from the city, tucked between pine forests and soft shafts of slanting sunlight. It wasn't remarkable: weathered wooden walls, tiny windows, a small porch with a creaking swing that moved whenever the wind passed. But the first time I saw it, I knew this was the place I would finally breathe again. On my first morning there, I woke without an alarm, without Jake's urgent phone calls, no assistants knocking on the door, no catered breakfast deliveries, no social media feed, waiting to measure my life against women parading designer handbags. Only birdsong, the gentle ripple of water along the lakeshore, and a silence, not frightening, but peaceful. I brewed myself a real cup of coffee, not the bitter espresso Jake preferred. Then I sat on the porch swing, swaying lightly as the sun rose over the horizon, spilling golden light across the surface of the water like honey. For the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel the need to prove anything to anyone. I simply existed, and it was enough. My phone hardly rang anymore. I had erased all my social media, blocked Jake's number, and forwarded old work emails to my lawyer. Only Sarah, my lawyer and friend, still messaged me now and then with updates on the legal aftermath. Jake had been ousted from the company. The Blackstone contract was officially canceled. Melissa had left the city scrubbing every account she'd once curated. And Jennifer, after everything, had rewritten her will. The estate would go to the Children's Fund along with a scholarship in my name. When Sarah texted, Jennifer left her entire share to the Brooke Carter Foundation. I broke down crying, not out of joy, but because I had never believed myself worthy of anyone's trust in that way. I started gardening. At first just a few pots of lavender on the porch, but soon I cleared a small patch of earth behind the cabin and began planting seeds, tomatoes, basil, kale, green beans. Not because I needed the food, but because I wanted to watch something grow from my own hands. Not bought with money, not performed for appearances, just life taking root and blooming. Every morning I watered the plants. Every afternoon I read. Sometimes I wrote a few lines in my journal, not about Jake, but about myself. I learned to bake no-knead bread. I learned to fix a leaky pipe. I learned to listen to myself without waiting for anyone else's approval. And I realized I didn't need the whole world to know I was right. I only needed myself to know this: I hadn't broken. I hadn't betrayed who I was. I had walked through the darkness and chosen to step into the light. Not with applause, but with silence that was full. Chapter 10. The Legal and Injustice Restored. It wasn't the party. It wasn't the letter. It wasn't even that midnight call. What truly broke Jake was the silence that followed. 1 month after the banquet, Sarah, my lawyer, called from her office. Jake just resigned from the board. But don't worry. The partners had already planned to oust him. They'd only been waiting for a reason. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel pity. Only one thing: it was right. The legal proceedings moved with surprising speed. Jake, or rather Jake Patterson Mitchell, as the corrected records now read, was no longer the legal heir to the Mitchell fortune. His official birth certificate was amended, listing his father as unknown. Jennifer's attorney submitted her handwritten letter, financial transfers, and Dr. Harrison's sworn testimony, all notarized, signed, and filed with the court. The Mitchell estate, worth over $47 million, including real estate shares, investment accounts, and heirlooms, was redistributed under the revised will. Sarah sent me a single stark text. Not a cent for Jake. I had to read it 3 times before it sank in. Jennifer, in one of her final acts, left everything to 2 causes: the National Children's Fund to give abandoned kids a chance at education, and the Brooke Carter Scholarship for young women in law who had survived psychological abuse or toxic families. When I received the official copy of the will, I sat in my wooden cabin staring at my name on it. Not under inheritance, but under enduring contribution. I hadn't inherited the estate. I didn't need it. What she left me was something far greater: recognition, a final apology, trust, and Jake. He moved into a small apartment downtown under his new legal name, Jake Patterson. Sarah told me he was struggling with the banks. Most of his assets had been tied to the Mitchell name or shared accounts. As for friends, they vanished after the banquet as though he were a contagion. No one wanted ties to the fraudulent heir. Melissa, she filed for a restraining order after Jake stood silently outside her office for weeks, not speaking, just watching. The man who once wielded a gaze like a weapon now couldn't summon a single word. Sarah said in a recent call, he thinks everyone is still talking about him. But the truth is, no one cares anymore. I laughed, a soft laugh like summer rain. That was the cruelest cut of all, not scandal, but being forgotten. Jake once wanted an ending with an audience. He wanted me broken in front of hundreds. He wanted to take his final bow, straighten his tie, and exit the stage as if he had won. But he forgot one thing. Truth doesn't need theater, and justice doesn't need spotlight. It arrives quietly, in every word, every page, every red seal on a court document, in every door that shuts without a sound. And I once dismissed as the background wife, now had my name in bold on a scholarship that would change the lives of other women, not because I was stronger than anyone else, but because I refused to let pain turn me into someone who only retaliated. I chose truth, and I walked away from Jake carrying the only thing he could never take back: freedom and legitimacy. Chapter 11. Silence as the final blow. Jake once believed that life was a stage. He was the lead. Everyone else existed as supporting roles orbiting him. Wife, mother, employees, partners, even lovers. And he believed that when the lights dimmed, people would talk about him forever. But what he never learned was this: no leading role survives in a play after the audience has left. One early autumn afternoon, I received a message from Sarah. He still hangs around the old club, sitting at the bar for 3 hours, ordering nothing but a soda with ice. When asked, he says, "They still remember me? They just talk behind my back." But the truth is, no one mentions him anymore. I read the message on the porch of my lakeside cabin, one hand holding a book, the other a cup of lavender tea I'd brewed myself. I didn't reply. I only smiled. Not a smile of triumph, but a smile of knowing I had truly stepped out of the play someone else had scripted for me. I don't think of Jake much anymore. Sometimes on still evenings his face flickers in memory, the day we first met, or the day he proposed. But it doesn't hurt. It's like seeing a stranger through frosted glass. I chose to vanish from everything that once defined me: social media, high society fundraisers, where laughter was loud but never sincere. No more checking who's following me, no more posting photos just to prove I'm fine. I don't need anyone to know anymore. I know, and that is enough. People often say silence kills more effectively than shouting. I didn't need to destroy Jake with scandal. I simply withdrew, leaving him alone with the truth. No one cared, no one waited, no one remembered, no views left for him. One day, Carmen, the nurse who had cared for Jennifer, came to visit me. We sipped tea on the porch, and she said Melissa's moved back to Ohio. She wiped herself completely off the internet. I nodded. Good for her. And Jake, sometimes he still asks how you're doing, not to win you back, just because he doesn't understand why you disappeared. I looked out at the lake, the breeze rippling its surface, and I answered because he never knew who I was. He only saw the reflection of the image he wanted others to see. Carmen was silent. Then she smiled. Maybe now you're truly yourself. I squeezed her hand gently, and for the first time in a long while, I felt truly seen, not by the world, but by someone who listened. Jake once wanted an audience for my downfall. but it was I who gave him an audience for his own collapse. And then I walked off stage, turned out the lights, closed the curtain, not staying to count the applause, not waiting for praise, just stepping outside, drawing a deep breath and living a life without a director, a life where I am the writer of my own script, a life where my silence was the most perfect ending. I did not fight back with anger. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to play dirty games of revenge. I simply walked off stage and turned off the lights, because sometimes silence is the deepest form of retribution. He once wanted an audience for my humiliation, but I gave him an audience for his downfall instead. Then I turned my back and chose to live a life with no director but myself. If this story made you feel stronger, if it brought you healing, hit like subscribe to Scarlet Vows and share it with the women who need to hear this, because here we tell the stories of women who rise not through fury, but through clarity. Thank you for listening, and never forget, every crack is where the light has a chance to break through.